1941. The Soviet Union was bleeding. Hitler's panzers were an unstoppable tide of steel, crushing everything in their path. Desperate times called for desperate measures, but Moscow's secret weapon wasn't a new tank or a massive cannon. It was man's best friend. This is the tragic, twisted, and ultimately failed history of the Soviet anti-tank dog units. The logic was rooted in science. Specifically, Ivan Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. Pavlov discovered that if you ring a bell before feeding a dog, the dog will eventually salivate at the sound alone. But the Red Army took this noble discovery and fed it into the gears of war. The training was brutally simple. Tank equals food. To ensure these dogs would dive under German panzers, they were systematically starved. Their loyalty was no longer a bond, it was a trigger. Science, meant to understand life, was now being used to deliver death. But the battlefield is not a laboratory. As the dogs moved to the front lines, the program collapsed under two fatal flaws. First, a sensory mismatch. The Soviet training logic was perfect on paper, but flawed in chemistry. Soviet tanks ran on diesel, while German panzers used gasoline. Having been trained exclusively under the scent of Soviet engines, the dogs ignored the German invaders. To them, the smell of food, the smell of home, was the heavy scent of Soviet diesel. In the heat of battle, many dogs turned back, seeking the familiar engines of their own comrades, leading to catastrophic friendly fire.
No!
Second, the psychological breaking point. In the quiet of a training camp, Pavlov's bells worked. But in the screaming chaos of 1941, the dogs faced a sensory overload they weren't prepared for. Theory suggests that intense survival instincts will always override conditioned reflexes once a psychological threshold is crossed. The deafening roar of advancing panzers and the blinding flash of explosions shattered their conditioning. Paralyzed by primal fear, the dogs stopped seeing a food source and saw only a monster. They fled back to the only safety they knew, the Soviet trenches. Imagine the horror in the trenches, a pack of terrified dogs charging back toward their handlers, carrying live explosives that could detonate at any moment. These loyal animals were no longer weapons. They had become mobile minefields. This forced Red Army commanders to issue a heart-wrenching order: open fire on any dog retreating toward our lines. The very men who had raised these dogs were now forced to execute their comrades to save their own lives. They were never disloyal. They were simply trying to return to the only people they ever trusted. Post-war records claim these units destroyed 300 German tanks, but at what cost? They also accidentally took out 200 of their own. By late 1942, the program was quietly scrapped. The survivors were retrained for mine detection and rescue, roles where their loyalty saved lives instead of ending them. This suicide dog experiment remains one of the most morally controversial chapters of World War II. The anti-tank dog program was a desperate scream from a nation on the brink of extinction. It was a failure of logic, but a testament to the brutal reality of total war. These dogs gave their lives for a cause they couldn't understand, proving that in war, even loyalty can be a curse. If you were a commander in 1941, would you have authorized this program? Let's discuss the morality of total war in the comments.
They learned a bell meant supper time, a perfect science, a perfect crime. We strapped the pack, they wagged a tail, sent loyalty into a fiery hail. But diesel smelled like home, not the foe, and our own T-34s began to glow.